When did the first state appear? You may think Sumer, Egypt, China, but what if the very idea of the state is only a few centuries old? Not 5,000 years, but 500. And what is the real state? Today you'll see how Uruk differs from the 21st century state and why the French Revolution changed not just politics, but the meaning of citizens, people and nation. Historians began asking about the first state only recently, with the rise of archaeology and comparative study of civilizations. In the 18th century, European scholars relied heavily on biblical texts. They believed the oldest countries were Egypt and the Kingdom of Israel. Ancient finds were seen as scattered curiosities or treasures, not a system of evidence. By the early 19th century, colonial powers like Britain, France and Germany began large-scale research in the Middle East. They mainly sought proof of biblical events. But colonialism also pushed progress in cartography and transport. Artifacts were now recorded and classified more systematically. A stable university system provided the academic base for analyzing these discoveries. Meanwhile, philosophers of the 17th and 18th centuries, like Hobbes, Locke and Rousseau, debated the origin of society. Here the threads came together: early theories of natural state and social contract, the Rosetta Stone and deciphering of cuneiform, which showed Egypt and Israel were not the oldest civilizations, and Darwin's theory of evolution, which carried into the humanities the idea that gradual development applies not only to nature but also to society. When this ladder of development, from savagery and barbarism to civilization, was traced backward using new archaeological and historical data, the question where did the first state emerge became central in historical science. From the historian's view, a state is a structure of governance. It is defined by centralized power, an administrative center, taxation laws and an army. In this sense, the main candidates for the first state are Sumerian city-states in Mesopotamia, Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Kish. By the 4th-3rd millennium BCE, they had temples, palaces, officials, scribes, armies and the first laws. Uruk around 4000 to 3000 BCE is often called the first state or the first urban civilization. Ancient Egypt after the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt under King Menes, Narmer, around 3100 BCE. Unlike the Sumerian city-states, this was already a centralized and territorially vast state. And the Harappan civilization, around 3300 to 1900 BCE. Cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa had grid planning, sewage systems, public baths and extensive trade networks. Yet, unlike the Sumerian Egypt, the Harappan script is still undeciphered. Without written sources, we know little about their governance, laws or administration. It might seem the list ends here, but this looks at the state only as a centralized management system. In modern sense, the state means something far more complex and far more interesting. Ancient states were tied to the figure of the ruler. He presented himself as a representative of the gods on earth. This makes it hard to call them states in the modern sense. What you see there is authority of the leader or proto-state formations, not institutions. In modern states, even in autocracies, power does not depend on personal ties to the ruler. The state apparatus stands apart from society. Greek city-states came closer to the idea of a state, not only because rulers were elected and replaceable. The polis was a new kind of society. First, it created the category of citizens, not just subjects or elites. In Greek, polites meant an active member of the community, a man of the polis. Second, politics itself was born there. The word politike meant what belongs to the polis. For the Greeks, politics was not abstract theory, it was everything connected to managing the community state. So can we call Athens the first state? Not quite. Athens lacked one key feature – monopoly on legitimate violence. Max Weber saw this as the defining line between ancient structures and what we now call a state. Yes, Greece gave us democracy, politics, and political thought, but the concept of the state came much later. Aristotle in Politics described forms of rule, but he called them politia, closer to constitution or form of rule. In the Middle Ages, terms like regnum, imperium, civitas were used. The word for a political organization of society in today's sense appeared with Niccolò Machiavelli. In 1513 he wrote The Prince and used the word stato, from Latin status. From then on, stato, etat, state, stat entered European languages. So, core traits of a state in the modern sense would be territory, population, central authority that makes binding decisions, administrative apparatus to enforce decisions, taxes, a system of collecting and redistributing resources, laws and norms, and monopoly on force. Only the state has the right to use violence through army and police. Private violence is illegitimate. We have already defined what we mean by state in the modern era. Now let's add the story of how humanity arrived at this form of social organization. In ancient times, people saw that it was practical to unite around a center of decision-making. That center was usually a monarch and, in rare cases, an elected ruler. Medieval society was built on personal ties between suzerain and vassal, ownership of land, and religious legitimation of power through church, papacy, and divine right of kings. In that sense, the state was viewed as the ruler's domain, not as a structure separate from him. From the 11th–12th centuries, cities grew, trade expanded, and a money economy appeared. Feudal fragmentation slowed economic growth and weakened security. At the same time, it distracted rulers with endless conflicts against rival claimants and the church. Formally, the king was supreme, but each lord held his own army, court, and taxes. This was the beginning of the medieval crisis and the slow collapse of the feudal order. Niccolò Machiavelli, who gave European political philosophy the very word stato, lived in Renaissance Italy. At that time, Italy was divided among many city-states, such as Florence, Venice, Milan, Naples, and the Papal States. These cities fought with each other and fell under the influence of France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire. The Florentine Republic, where Machiavelli served, rose and fell and was finally seized by the Medici. Machiavelli fell from power. He searched for an answer: how to build a strong, stable state amid fragmentation, war, and foreign pressure. He saw that traditional medieval values, divine right and knightly morality, didn't work in real politics. He was not alone. Many saw that in late medieval Europe, strong states were more stable and beneficial to the citizens. Merchants and townspeople were not bound to feudal lords. They wanted strong central power to guarantee order and common rules. They became allies of kings against the nobility. Power began to concentrate in monarchs, and feudal fragmentation gave way to absolutist monarchies. Feudal domains were loose alliances of lands and vassals, not true states. Absolutist monarchies moved much closer to what we now call a state. Take France under Louis XIV. Building on Richelieu's reforms, he weakened the nobility, created a strong bureaucracy, Europe's first standing army, and a police force. His France became a model of state organization that shaped all of Europe. By Weber's criteria, France under Louis XIV can be counted among the very first states in history. There is a famous phrase attributed to Louis XIV that should raise concern for anyone who has seen in history how centralization, taken to the level of personal rule, even with monopoly on violence, makes a state incomplete and unstable. In the 20th century, we saw no fewer examples of this than in the age of absolute monarchies. Those examples were even darker and more vivid. The principle is captured in the words, "I am the state." Historians debate whether Louis actually said this. Either way, the phrase becomes a symbol of absolutism, where the state is identified with the ruler himself. Absolutism built a strong apparatus – army, police, bureaucracy, but as long as power rested on one person, the state was fragile. A ruler can be clever, willful and strong, but no matter how great, he will end. And then comes a crisis of succession. More often the crisis starts even during his lifetime, since in such over-centralized system, no force exists to restrain the monarch's abuses. Louis XIV's final words were telling, "I loved war and palaces too much." Modern France is not the French president. Few states today define themselves through their ruler. A true modern state needs something beyond centralization and monopoly on violence. So, what is it? In fact, there are three answers. First, let's have a look at England after the Glorious Revolution. Here, the first stable constitutional monarchy emerged. Parliament limited the monarch's power, and the Bill of Rights, 1689, was adopted. England created the first durable institutional model of the state. Power was separated from the person of the ruler. England had experimented with absolutism even earlier than France. After the Norman conquest, the monarchy built stronger royal power than on the continent – sheriffs, a land register, royal courts. In the 15th–16th centuries, especially under the Tudors, power grew more centralized. Henry VII destroyed the barons' independence after the Wars of the Roses. He banned them from keeping private armies, strictly controlled marriages and inheritance, and used the Star Chamber to prosecute overmighty lords. His successors Henry VIII and Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, completed this course by subjugating the Church and building control over finance and administration. In the 17th century, the Stuarts, especially Charles I, tried to rule without parliament, relying on divine right. But the rising bourgeoisie and new nobility demanded a role in governance and protection of their economic interests. This led to civil war, the execution of Charles I, and Cromwell's brief republic. At this time, Hobbes wrote Leviathan, defending the need for a strong sovereign to prevent the war of all against all. But the republic brought no stability. After the Restoration, conflict between crown and parliament flared again. It was resolved in the Glorious Revolution of 1688, when Parliament removed James II and invited William of Orange to rule. This was a contract. Monarchy remained, but law and Parliament limited royal power. The Bill of Rights of 1689 secured parliamentary supremacy, elections, and freedom of debate. Thus, England turned the state from personalized monarchy into a system of institutions independent of the ruler. Hobbes' Leviathan reflected fear of chaos and trust in absolute rule. The Glorious Revolution showed another path – stability through balance of institutions and checks and balances. The second candidate is the United States after the Constitution of 1787. After independence, the 13 colonies tried to lose a confederation. The Articles of Confederation left the center too weak. Congress could not levy taxes, no standing army existed, each colony had its own laws and currency. Collapse loomed. So, in 1787, delegates met in Philadelphia to draft not fixes, but a new foundation. The Constitution created a strong federal government and built a system of check and balances. Unlike England's Bill of Rights, which restrained the monarch, the US Constitution established a full architecture of power with executive, legislative and judicial branches. It defined how the state was organized and what held it together. This was the first modern written constitution, a positive model of the state as a legal system. The American model set a new global standard. The state was now a system of institutions enshrined in law, not the will of a ruler. And last but not least, France after the Revolution of 1789. Revolutionary France became the first modern state in another sense. In the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, sovereignty was placed in the nation, not in monarch or dynasty. This broke with the divine rights of kings. The state was no longer the monarch's property, but the political organization of the people. A new idea appeared, the nation. Not subjects of a ruler, but equal members of a single political body. The nation became the source of power and legitimacy. That shift transformed the very meaning of state. The US Constitution began with "We the people," declaring the people as sovereign. But America remained a federation, and states guarded their rights. In France, the idea of sovereignty as indivisible supreme power had already been forming since the 16th century. Jean Bodin argued sovereignty belongs to the state, not just the king. But in practice, power still concentrated in the monarch. The revolution transferred sovereignty not to one person, but to the nation. Slavic folklore tells of a soldier tricking a stingy woman into making porridge with an axe. In the end, the axe is removed, but the porridge remains. Something similar happened with sovereignty. Concentrating power in monarch and elite is the simplest state form, but to create a modern, stable state, power must be handed to the people of the nation. And then, like the eggs from the porridge, the monarch can be taken out. So what do you think truly sets modern states apart from earlier prototypes? The monopoly on violence, the system of check and balances, the fact that this system is enshrined in a kind of sacred document, or the idea that sovereignty must belong to the entire body of citizens? Or do you believe that the states of the ancient world are not fundamentally different from what we deal with today? Write your answers in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe.